Welcome to this next episode of Your Music, Your Story. Today we've got Jonathan and Marina from the band Bones and Teeth. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Nice to be here.
Yeah.
Go team. Luna is super happy you guys are here. Now she's probably going to take a nap.
Yes,
Awesome.
it looks like that.
So how long have you guys been in a band? I know that you'd mentioned that you were an opera singer, Marina.
Basically, the first time we played music together, the three of us, Jonathan, Jared, and myself, was in high school, which we were in marching band together, so we all we were kids together. We all grew up together, playing music together. Our first time really putting together a band was, I think, in high school as well, but it wasn't. It was, how in high school you're not really sure what you want your musical sound to be, especially as a band. You don't really know. So I think I was playing guitar. We had somebody else singing. Jonathan was, I can't remember if you were playing bass or drums. I'm
pretty sure I was playing bass.
I want to say bass. And then somebody else was playing drums and Jared was also playing guitar. But of course now our setup is completely different. I'm singing, I'm playing keyboards. Jonathan's playing drums, not bass. Jared's playing guitar, which he's really good at. So that all worked out fine. But yeah, in the middle of those two things, my professional opera career kind of started around 2008, 2009, and I've been doing it since then. So I guess that's close to 15 years now. Which seems insane. I would say I made a living at it for maybe 3 years, maybe 4 years. And I think that's actually pretty typical for most opera singers.
Really?
Yeah.
It's just a quick, and then.
I think, overall, the industry is doing really cool things, but ultimately on the decline as far as cultural relevance. I think there's a lot of things we could do to change that. And I think there's a lot of movement toward that by the industry because we don't want to be as irrelevant. But I think there's a big disagreement about how to move forward and how to sort of capture new audiences, how to get younger people, particularly our age group, interested in opera, the people in their 30s and 40s. But it's a tough industry. It's not easy to get into, very difficult to stay in, as far as I'm concerned. But I know lots of people who have just kind of either moved away from singing, they're pivoting, they're doing other things as well. So it's kind of everybody's looking to, I have one guy that I know who's, he's doing stand-up comedy now. There's a lot of things.
Opera.
Well, actually he's really good at it. It's really tough. I think you just have to find what works for you, what you're best at besides opera, and lean into those two things, because it's very difficult, even for the people who are at the top of the field, to pay their mortgages, make a living doing it, which is sad, but not all that different from the mainstream music industry, I think, and what it's dealing with right now as well.
Yeah, I don't know. So I started playing drums in 92.
Oh my gosh.
So here we are, whatever.
Yeah.
That must have been so cool, though. I mean, that sounds amazing to me, just because that was such an exciting time for music.
Yeah.
We didn't know. We were just like,
Right.
Let's do it anyway.
That was a cool era, man.
Yeah.
But so cool.
I think from then until now, I mean, I maybe could name 3 or 4 that I actually know that don't have jobs and music's a hobby on the side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's tough.
I think that's where we are with it as well, with Bones and Teeth. I think I'm sort of looking to make music my full-time job again after many years of not having that be the case. And so for me, it's difficult. You get trapped in those office jobs and trapped in kind of administrative jobs to pay the bills, but where's the balance? You kind of have to find time to do the things that you love as well. So that's tricky for us.
Not to mention that like Marina's moved a bunch of times. She's lived in different parts of the country for years at a time. You know?
When we started working on this first album that we released in June, I think it was beginning of 2020, which is arguably the worst time to begin writing an album.
That really hurt a lot of people.
Yeah, it really did. And I think, especially for momentum, I know we have some friends that were in bands that were really finding their rhythm, and then the pandemic hit, and you know, with the loss of so many venues, I think that's made a huge impact on the whole industry, and it's hard to see.
I think a lot of people also okay, now bars are open, now shows are happening. A lot of people got used to just not going to see shows. I've heard that.
I think with streaming shows too being so popular, and I know that's something that we would really like to get into as well, and we kind of have we're on the way. We've got our setup now, and so it's just a matter of getting some equipment. But of course, I think the better live stream that you want to put on, the more expensive the equipment that you want to use is. So it's a bit of a catch-22, and I don't know about you guys, but like I feel like nothing really replaces the experience of a live show.
No, I totally agree.
I think we recently saw Plague Vendor at Alex's bar, and that was such a fun. One of the first shows that I'd been to post pandemic, just because I was more cautious than most people for quite a long time. Plague Vendor and Rage Against the Machine, those were my first concerts back, just because like you want to go and you want to see a band that you know is going to put on a good show that isn't just going to, you know, I love some doomy bands, don't get me wrong at all, but I think especially after the pandemic, people are looking for more showmanship. People want an exciting experience.
They want to be entertained.
Yeah, and they want a reason to have left the house. If you're going home and you're kind of like, oh, I kind of wish I'd stayed home, like obviously that's not good. I don't think there's too much of that, but yeah, it's pretty exciting.
So, out of curiosity, with the opera thing, what kind of changes would they make? Because I mean, I 100% agree with you. Anytime I think of opera, what I think of is the 1800s and the people with their wigs and going to fancy parties. And old people.
Yeah, I think that is our biggest obstacle that we have to overcome. I think. It's difficult because the industry itself is so divided about how to recapture people's attention that it becomes really difficult to nail down one specific effort or one type of thing that brings people into the opera. For the longest time, opera has kind of had this I don't want to say it's a Hollywood complex, but it definitely has become much more about singers' appearance in the last 30 to 40 years.
So not so much about the vocal, it's what you present.
And what they would say is that they're looking for the total package. And I think that's fine to an extent. It's not that on the one hand, I understand it. On the other hand, I don't think that anyone goes to the opera to like look at hot people. If that makes any sense.
I could never thought. Do you know where I'm going for picking up chicks? An opera.
I'm going to the opera. Yeah, like
there's some hot dudes over there in the ballet or something.
Exactly. Well, and I think it's fine if that's your jam. And I don't want to yuck anyone else's yum. Like if that's what people want to go to the opera for, sure, that's great. But I also think when we stop being about the music, it's a big problem. And I think that's something that's not unique to opera either. Like I think bands have the same problem when it becomes more about your social media presence, your image, your branding, rather than the work that you're putting out, the art, the music. You know, I think that's why I look up to, bands that are a little bit more about the total experience. We saw Tool. My husband and I saw Tool in New York, and they put on such an amazing show on so many different levels. It was, it wasn't just the art, it wasn't just the music, it was the total experience altogether. And I just thought
going
that
deaf.
was so, yeah. I mean, it was definitely loud. It was definitely loud, but
It's like the loudest concert I've ever been to.
honestly,
Really?
I think that's so interesting because we heard them at Barclays Center, and it wasn't too loud for me. But I think I have heard that from other people. So I wonder if it's a big acoustical difference depending on
How big is Barclays Center? Like, I saw them at the Forum years ago, and I literally, I shit you not, my chest hurt from the bass drum pounding. I was like, is this normal? I was in high school, and I was like, I saw many shows after that, and I'm like, that was one of the loudest concerts I've ever been to in my life. It was ridiculous.
Do you guys think that's just the Forum though? Because I've definitely been to shows there where I'm like, okay, I have a migraine now and I have to go lay down in the dark.
So I definitely think there's acoustics for stuff, but then there's also turn that up. and like where some are all around even sound, but some where it's just, I mean, like I said, I like when you go to those shows and where you can feel that bass drum. I mean, it thumps. You can hear it, you can feel it, you just go, huh. But sometimes you can be like, holy crap.
Yeah, sometimes it's
this
like
is getting a little too much.
Yeah, it's a little painful sometimes. Like if it's actually like echoing here, you're just like, no, that's not.
But I definitely think there's acoustics. So I was up at Utah State. I've talked about it before. There's a place called the Field House that they like to play, and the Field House was an indoor gym that had a track around it, and then the inside for whatever track and field, and it was just kind of like a metal building. And it was cool, but acoustically, it's just terrible.
Oh, I could
just
see that.
terrible because
like our
just,
high school basketball stage.
Oh,
yeah, I mean, just
God,
everything rang and all over the place. It was terrible. So I think this to an extent, yeah, but then you get into like some of these bigger places. I mean, I don't know. Because, I mean, how much echo are you going to get? Like at the Forum, that's not small.
Yeah.
By the time it gets to the back, I don't know.
That's interesting because when we saw Rage, it was at Madison Square Garden. So, of course, in a stadium like that, I felt like it actually was not as loud as I was expecting it, but that's purely because of the acoustic. It's such a large space that even with... it was Run the Jewels and Rage Against the Machine, and Run the Jewels was actually louder because they had piped in a band. They weren't playing with a live band. So that was something I thought was interesting. But yeah, I think the bigger the spaces, the more things just kind of, I don't know, dissipate. The sound dissipates more, especially as you get higher up. When you get up to the nosebleeds in Madison Square Garden, you can. We also saw Fish there, which I hate Fish. I'm so sorry to Fish. I'm
Me
so
too.
sorry to
Word.
this man.
Oh no, I feel it's like I told Rita
and
recently.
I apologize to any Fish lovers out there listening. I'm so sorry. It's jazz for white people. I don't know how to explain it any better than
sucks,
that.
that's what.
My husband loves it so much, and like I love him, so I go.
So you tolerate it.
So I went, yeah, and I also got really desperate. I was really sober, which is
that's
really
the problem right there when you went to a Fish show.
The worst thing to be at a Fish show is sober. So, after a certain amount of time, these girls were, clearly snorting something out of the bag, and I was like, okay, so can I get in on this? So
I need something.
So I had a little hit of Molly, right before the end, and then I was like, okay, this isn't terrible, but it was overall not a fun experience, and also don't take drugs from strangers, friends. Like, just don't do it. Later, I was really angry with myself because I was like, I could have died at a Fish show, and that would have been very embarrassing for me.
Way to put on your tombstone, died at a Fish show.
That's so embarrassing. That's not how I want to go.
Don't put that on my tombstone, please.
But fentanyl's a real problem. Kids, please don't take drugs from strangers.
I was telling her recently because we bonded over this a little bit more. My cousin took me to Doobie Brothers at the but you see, I'm not prepared for it. I'm not into that type of stuff. So he took me. We was at the Bowl, the Hollywood Bowl, and it was like I had no idea what I was in for. And it was like her and I were saying it's like the same thing. It was like, did everybody over the age of 40 show up to this? Like I was like and everybody was talking during the show, and they're like, "Oh, we just love this solo." I'm like, "Which solo? We've been soloing for 20 minutes." Like, and John Mayer was very impressive, but like, guys, shut up, let them play. And they're like, and they kept talking about all these people just around me talking about, "Oh, I was at the show last week. I was at the show in New York." I'm like, "Guys, shut up!" Like, I went to go get some food, and I almost got knocked over by some hippies that were strung out, and they had no idea what they were doing with it.
That's funny.
That is funny. That reminds me of seeing Jimmy Buffett, also similar vibe, like older hippies, not super self-aware of what they're doing. That's
I'd have to say the oldest band I ever saw was Bret Michaels.
Oh, that's
because my wife liked Poison and all that back in the 80s.
Yeah, for sure.
So they came down to the Riverside. So I'm like, hey, let's go.
Yeah,
that sounds like
that's like the furthest that I've been to, like,
he
going
can still
back.
Sing too, like from what I've heard, like he's
definitely
like,
better than
Axl.
Vince Neil or Axl.
Like the way Axl's voice has aged, poor guy. Like, but also it's a good reminder. Also, I think to me, to. There's a tendency with rock music specifically to sing in a way that's not vocally healthy for you. And there are certain
for sure.
Yeah, and there are certain singers like there's the Lemmys of the world who can just sing like that all the time for some reason, even
I
though
think that's their voice.
He can't anymore, guys.
Even though
anymore.
It's like he must, for sure. R.I.p.
But
yes.
Yeah, true story. But also like, there's vocal takes of Lemmys that you hear that are raw that you're just like, how did he ever phonate again after that? Like, how did he ever make sound after,
he didn't need to.
After that? Because it sounds like his chords just exploded on that take. And yet they're still able to do it night after night. I would have said Steven Tyler as well, but now poor Steven Tyler is like has a fractured larynx, which I'm like, that's like not sure. Thank you, Steven Tyler. Now I have something else to be terrified of happening to me.
I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah, like a fractured larynx is like, that's no joke.
What happens with that?
Well, I think because the larynx, essentially sits on, like, directly adjacent to your vocal cords. So not having that anchored in a specific spot, it's generally considered like good vocal technique to sing with a lower larynx, so that you're not reaching for notes, you're not grabbing, you're not, sort of hurting yourself or straining.
Is that what would cause it? Is you can't hit that note, but you're pushing everything to get to it, and that's kind of what causes that?
I actually think, like, if you think down as you try to sing up and vice versa, go like up as you go down. Those are like my two like easy Marina's easy singing hacks. If you try to like ground yourself more as you're going for a high note, think down as you go up, think up as you go down, when in terms of what you're singing, that helps a lot. But yeah, a larynx needs to be pliable, needs to move, and if it's fractured, you can't do that. So I feel for him. That's rough. And then there are other singers too, like Björk, who I'm just like, I don't know how she's still able to sing.
It must be the cold weather.
But it's like
she's got a nice voice, but geez, her music sucks.
Oh gosh, I love her. I love her music.
Oh
I mean,
gosh.
her earlier stuff for sure. But I totally get why it's not everybody's jam too. Like, nobody has to like everything that I like.
I'm not sure what I listen to when I listen to Björk.
Yeah, well,
I've just heard them like every now and then when it comes on, you're like, oh yeah, that's definitely her.
I think her lyrics are like rife for comedy, because there's like, I remember seeing something that was like, oh, you're asking Björk a question. It's like, oh yes, the angel did extend its arm and I was like, it's all like very like drawn out. Like she writes in such a way that I'm like, I can see why it annoys people. But I also think she's just like a gifted lyricist. But everybody's different and likes different things, and I think that's awesome. That's what makes music great, in my opinion, is disagreeing. You know,
Definitely.
That's why I have all the different styles. Who cares? If, you like this, you like that. Who cares?
Yeah, and I think too, like, you know, if we love that as a band. Like, we don't want to stick to one specific. Like, we genuinely consider ourselves a rock band because that leaves a lot of room for changing genres, changing style, changing, like, I think all of our favorite bands that we love to listen to are never doing the same thing over and over. They're always trying to change. They're always evolving and growing and as artists. And I think that's important.
We also have all of our favorite bands are different.
That's true too. Yeah, like we actually, between the three of us, I feel like we all have really different. So what would be
some of your guys' favorites?
Like for me, I mean, as I've grown up more, like when I was younger, Led Zeppelin all the way.
Okay.
And then I only listened to classic rock when I was younger. And then around the time that Marina and I hung out a lot in high school when we first started high school, and that's when we would listen to classic rock all the time. And then my thing people know about me is I heard Limp Bizkit once, and I was like, "What is that? That is weird." And I'm like, "What? I love the guitar out of that. You know, the beats and the guitar." I was like, "What? I've never heard anything like this." So I stopped listening to the classic rock station all the time and started listening to newer music, anything beyond the 70s. And I was like, oh, there's other stuff out there. You know?
I did not know such things.
I know, yeah.
Yeah, this was back when K-Rock was like not really like a classic rock station.
Yeah.
Like now it's like it's I don't know, they've all swapped around.
So what would have been yours? Like, yeah, and then mine now, it's like for a while it's been the Mars Volta.
Okay.
That's been one of my favorites.
He's a good drummer.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Well, the bassist too.
So,
oh my god, I love that bassist.
Like what is it? Thigpen? Is that his name?
Oh, John. I like them all. There's Thomas Pridgeon.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and then the original drummer John Theodore. They were both ridiculous, and but as I get older, I've been drawn more towards really good guitar work. Like,
okay,
you know, like some of the hardcore bands I still like Norma Jean and Converge or something like that. That's something about when you hear guitars for me, it makes me want to play. Like, you know, like I don't like thinking about bass parts or drum parts. Sometimes I like to hear guitars in my head.
So if you write music or you write stuff, it's going to be written on a guitar, whether like in this band, you're going to play the drums, but you would think more of music that you're writing in a guitar sense. And then
I do personally, like because I like hearing melodies to play along to, especially that I play drums a lot more now.
Okay.
You know, when I was younger, I played bass all the time, and I was playing a lot of funk and stuff like that. But as I get older and I've been playing more drums, I like to hear a melody and play along with that. And then with like our band, like I'll tend to usually hear the guitar part first. We'll write some stuff down, and then when she starts singing on it, I'm like, everything just starts to click. Because also then it's not only like I'm given markers about where we're at in certain songs and stuff like that, but then also it's like a complete thing. You're like, oh, it also gives you like words to think
makes
about.
Sense now.
Yeah, it's I don't know. Drums are weird for me because I wasn't originally a drummer until high school.
He's so full of shit though, because like he played drums all through high school. Like
but that's when I first started playing. I didn't start playing until high school.
Like I guess as like set. Like like that's different as opposed to.
So you did marching band, and then set later.
In middle school, I was in orchestra as a bassist, and then when I got to high school, we had no orchestra, so I was like, I'll join the marching band. I'll play drums because I like drums, and then I just had to play all the different percussion instruments and stuff like that, and then I didn't start playing set until like way after high school when we all started hanging out again a little bit when she was in college. Marina was in college, and I started playing in a hardcore band with my buddy Jared, and our guitarist, after high school. And then I never stopped playing drums after that because everybody's all kind of said it's hard to find a drummer that works, and drummers are generally a little nutty. So
you mean they are nutty, not generally?
Generally.
I also think it's easier to find a competent bass player than a competent drummer in my opinion, but that could just be my opinion.
I mean, we can do bass jokes all day. I mean, it's any guitarist can play bass.
Yeah, I think Jonathan said to me one time in a text message, Marina, any idiot can play the bass. And I strongly disagree, actually, because I tried and I failed at it.
And I'm not an idiot.
Yeah. I played guitar, but I was, never on the level that like Jared is, our guitarist. But I thought, oh, well, my skills will transfer over. It'll be fine. That was not the case. I think there's a certain amount of dexterity that you need, and like my wrist is all fucked up. So it just work. Was like, yeah, it was just like, no. Well, and also I think because piano and keyboard, that was my first instrument. It's the latency time between brain going play this is on the
shorter.
Piano. Yeah, is a lot shorter when I'm playing keyboards. So that's ultimately what we decided would be. But we went back and forth for forever. Yeah, like to the point that
almost a year
that we recorded bass tracks on our album, and then we're like, nope, we're doing keyboards instead. Just kidding. Throw the whole thing out. But I think that's important, and I think we wanted to figure that stuff out earlier rather than later, because it's, I don't know, you can always switch back, but it's easier if you have just like a more standard setup going forward. You're like, nope, this person plays this person plays this.
So is that like, so, you know, if you're doing drums and Jared's doing guitar, you're doing piano, which is you're covering the bass on the piano, or you're just leaving that part out?
I think we're like now evolving past that. We want to be more, I don't know. I think a good bass line is definitely on our tracks that you can hear, but I think we want it to be more than that, or at least I do going forward. We want it to be more of a fuller sound overall, a more symphonic sound overall than something that's just, I think something we love about the bands that we love, you know, it's a big sound. It's something that you can really wrap yourself up in, as opposed to something that's a little bit more bare bones, which there's a place for that too. It's just like, I think for our particular, the music we're trying to make, we want a big sound.
And then also on top of it, Marina didn't mention that she's her family history. Her father runs an organ company, and pipe organ company. And she's known about pipe organs for years.
Is sort of an exaggeration of what he
started.
Does.
He ran.
He's in his 80s now, so he's he's older. Running the business would not be the way that I describe it. I think he's more. It's a labor of love, but I actually, my day job is working at a pipe organ building facility.
Oh wow!
So the pipe organ is obviously something that I think is, when you think about the loudest, most annoying instruments that exist, for me, it's like, it's a pipe organ, it's bagpipes, it's opera. There's definitely a theme here that connects all of it. I'm not sure what it is, but I think we're going to figure it out. So we really like kind of the Hammond organ sound. Like that's something that is definitely of interest to me anyway. I love that there's a lot of variants that organs can provide. Like whatever sound you want can come out of that instrument. And so I think there's something of merit there.
I didn't even know that until we started hanging out more recently, and she started talking about, I'm like, wait, there's more than like 3 settings? She's like, oh yeah, there's this and this and this. I'm like, I didn't even know that. I mean,
organs. there are pipe organs in Southern California that are capable of making over 100 different instruments sound come out of this huge thing. So it's cool. It's and also the electro-pneumatic sort of portion of it is really interesting, but probably very boring to your listeners. So we can move on to something else. Let's get to something juicy now.
Yeah.
They're like, can you please stop talking about pipe organ?
I don't have a problem.
No one
with
cares.
I was just trying to pull it all in with like when she started playing keyboards. We're like,
all together.
Hey, how about I'm also biased because I like the Mars Volta, and they have an organist.
That's true, and we were very inspired by that. I think like that sound that Mars Volta has is something that we've always really liked in bands and the groups that we've loved over the years. So I think it's just found its way into the mix, sort of by accident.
I think on the technical level too, what's nice about, because I mean our band's pretty heavy sounding, and when you throw in like an organ with it, it has like how would you describe it, Marina? It's like with the overtones and stuff. When you hold chords and stuff down, it doesn't sound just straight. It sounds like this big thing's happening. You hear like variance in the tone. You hear the rah, rah, in the background.
I think it helps,
it's like,
I think it helps break it up a little bit when you just have a few. Like ultimately, music and rock music specifically sort of boils down to, okay, we have this set of chords that we kind of go back to. There's a 1, 4, 5. Kind of chord progression that we stick to a lot. But there's,
you mean every punk song ever?
Much,
1, 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah, and that's it. And like and actually, I love bands that are like that too. Like, don't get me wrong, because I mean,
Ramones.
I love the Pixies. I love the Pixies, and a lot of it is that. But I also think what I like about them is that they mix it up. They throw things in there. A music producer that I knew kind of describes it as like ear candy. Like it's something that gives you, it's a little bit different from the rest of the texture that you're listening to that kind of pops out. So I feel like that's, something we really liked about the organ sound with everything. But I don't know, like I think we're still playing around. Like I would love to see if like we just want to. I have this really cool Roland XP50 that I bought. That's I think circa
90s, mid 90s.
Yeah,
oh, wow.
Yeah. So it has all these really cool sounds on it that are all.
It's like it's
all analog. Like it's more analog sounding than digital. So it just is really it's a really cool old keyboard, and also a lot of really things that sound straight out of a Michael Jackson album. Like there's some really cool sounds on there. There's one that's literally just the opening of The Who's Won't Be Fooled Again. You hit one note and it just does that whole thing.
Yeah.
And you go, oh, okay. So it's clear that it was made for a time when music was more complicated. And I love that. Whereas now things are so, anyone can get one of those beat pads and just create a beat, which, you can create a beat on this using an actual keyboard, which I find fascinating. To me, it's just an added challenge, but also dealing with things like VSTs now, and you're getting plugins on Ableton, and Pro Tools, any of these things. You've got to pay to use certain sounds, and when you're putting out music commercially, you've got to avoid using a lot of these plugins and whatever, because you don't want your music to get yanked off because somebody wants a cut of what you're doing.
Yeah, randomly.
Which only happens when you blow up. But
ain't no one care when you're small time.
Yeah. Right, exactly. So it's like there's an advantage to that, but at the same time, we haven't quite figured out how to. I think it's a dark time for residuals and royalties for musicians in general.
Not just musicians.
For everybody. I mean, the actors and the writers are probably going to get what they want, which is great. And I hope that spills over into music too. Please, dear.
Please, Taylor Swift helped us.
Please, dear Kabbalah monster. I don't know. Yeah. I don't believe in God, but it is what it is. I also think too, like, you have to kind of find ways around the typical stuff, because things like DistroKid, they'll notice at a certain point if you've been using too many of those plugins, which that was really unfortunate for me when I started creating music on my own in 2020 in my Brooklyn basement, which was just such a crazy time, but I'm really glad I learned how to use a DAW and became a real musician.
Not this side hustle stuff.
Not this none of this opera nonsense. No, I think like that's something too that the classical world is I think struggles with, is sort of finding ways to you could really make some high concept art albums out of operatic themes, out of operatic music. So I'd love to see a little bit more of that happen within the art form. And I'd love for us to move away from this kind of opera as interpretive film movement that now there's a lot of just like emphasis on, okay, it's this really lovely high quality 4K production of a group of art songs, and it's like, okay, it sounds great in theory, and some of them are really amazing post-production and some of them just aren't.
Just atrocious crap.
Yeah, just some of it is really pretentious, and I think would actually drive people away further away from the art form. So I think there's a little bit to be said. Also, Franco Zeffirelli, who's this really he was a terrible man, but he made some amazing operatic films that were in the 70s and 80s that are absolutely spectacular. So it can be done, right?
Yeah.
We just have to figure out a way to make it modern, make it possible, and also financially accessible, which I think is the biggest challenge, is creating art and music in this day and age. There's a paywall. There's a paywall everywhere you go.
Everywhere.
So it's tough. I think especially for me as an opera singer, like I've put so much money into the career that I'm not really having, that it is difficult to now be in this band and we're like, oh, so you can get your album promoted, you just have to pay $5,000. Like, it's kind of like, wait, I just left that. Like, I don't want to do that. But also at least with sort of certain promotional services, you will get a guaranteed playlist spot, or you'll get a guaranteed album review or a review of your single, whatever it is. Whereas with opera, you can put $100,000 into it easily and never walk away with anything. So I don't know. It's a trade-off, and I think it's the devil you know versus the devil you don't know. And at this point, for me, there's so much more artistic freedom in making music with these guys than there ever was for me in opera, and so that's hard to ignore. Yeah, that's hard to ignore.
I guess I'll join you.
Yeah, well, and also too, like, when you're a young opera singer and you're working in a big company for the first time, none of the decisions that you make about your performance are really yours. You work with these musical coaches who tell you, no, you have to sing it exactly like this because that's how Callis sang it. That's how this person sang it. That's how, they know the history. So it must be like that. And then you also have a stage director that's like, okay, you're going to run over here and then you're going to sing this. And then I'm going to run back to the other side of the stage and then you're singing. I'm like, yeah, that's going to sound great after I've been huffing and puffing for sure. Yeah. I'm totally going to nail that high note. Said no one. But it's one of those things where as you get older, you realize, oh, if I want to have input, I'm going to have to speak up for myself. And some companies and directors will let you do that, and some of them won't. So
is it rigid, just kind of the rules of opera, or is it rigid more kind of like the fan base, to where people who would come and expect it to sound X amount of way, and so we want you to make it sound like they're expecting? Is that what the deal, why they're so
yes and yes,
wow.
Basically, and I get it too, because some of these people have heard, it's harder when our audience base is older, right? Because we're dealing with a certain type of person, and I'm not going to cast any sort of aspersions, because I genuinely love older people and I love singing for them. The only problem is sometimes their ideas about what certain things should be are a little bit more, I heard Beverly Sills sing this in 1976 and she was perfect. And if you're not perfect, you're trash, So it's a little bit more, we have, I think, public opinion working against us a little bit, and that's okay to a certain extent, but it also is a bit limiting, right? Like, I think for a lot of singers, it's more exciting to do new compositions, work with composers who are still alive and create new works. So I've done a lot of that, which I've really, really enjoyed. That is a lot more like, hey, you wrote this word on a high C. Could we maybe change the word? Because one time, oh my God, this amazing composer who I love, he wrote the word retrograde on a high C, which... Okay,
multiple syllables.
I do know sopranos that would have absolutely no problem with that. Unfortunately, I'm not one of them, and I was singing the role. So, what could I have done? And essentially, I worked with the composer until we found kind of a solution to it. And I love that because you get to have a say in how people sing that piece for the rest of that piece's life. And sometimes new operas take off and other people perform them, and sometimes they don't. But at least you got to make your artistic mark on something, which is, if you're singing La Traviata for the 5 billionth time at, it's... Everyone in that audience has heard it at least 10 times. There's no surprises. So for me, I think it's, and I don't mean any disrespect to anyone that likes that either, but for me, I need a little something more. Like I need a little bit more of something that captures my attention. And maybe that's my age. Maybe that's... all of I've just sat through so many operas where I thought, it's great, but there's nothing groundbreaking or new or interesting about it. And sometimes just the way the business works, singers have to sing, back in the day for opera singers, like in the 60s, in the golden age of opera, they'd sing one opera a week. Now, a lot of opera singers, the most famous ones, the ones that are actually paying their bills with opera, are singing, 4 performances a week. For something like Wagner that's 5 hours long, that is incredibly vocally taxing. So you also hear a lot of ooh when you go to the opera, and I just don't think that's what anyone's interested in hearing. You hear people that sound tired, that sound exhausted, and that's because the business wants to make as much money off of the artists as they can. But I don't think I think there are a lot of opera singers out there who need to be working more than they are, and the distribution of who they hire should just be slightly larger, because I think the singing overall would be much better. But I think there are bands that tour too much. I'm really curious to hear what you guys are there bands that you are aware of that you're just like, that singer sounds so tired. I'm not sure they're still alive or up there. They're just hunched over the mic, and you can just tell they're exhausted. I don't know.
It's
I don't know. One that gets me though is I really think that, like what you're talking about, I think that some things get predictable. Yeah. For example, I love punk, and it's fun.
Yeah.
But you can go listen to a lot of these punk shows, unfortunately, and you get 4 bands. And the first one sounds just like the fourth one. Like they all, and, you can tell that there's differences, a little bit of a different style, but sometimes it's always the fast punk beat on the drums with the bass going. Like, it's very similar. You go and watch some of these rock shows, and it's very similar. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of the issue that I have. And I think that's why I think, like, for example, when you talked about, like, when Limp Bizkit came out and Korn.
Yeah.
It was, you had the grunge era. Now you had this thing that's different.
Yeah.
Now, I know a lot of people are hating on it, the new metal, but to me, it was different. Just like grunge was different from the hair bands that you had in the 80s. 80s were different from when you had 60s. So to me, it's when you have something different. When bands all sound the same, it becomes predictable. And you're just like,
And, like, I have a little backstory story on that. So, like, my step cousin is Eddie Vedder.
Oh, wow.
And so when I didn't really know what was going on. I was pretty young when he, like, I never actually, I can remember meeting him, but so he has a lot of brothers, and I see his brothers a lot in the 90s, and then when I still see him every now and then for Christmas or something like that. And when growing up, I was like, wait, who is this guy? And then my dad kept saying that he was a pretty good crooner from, the 60s. And he could say, yeah, he just can't hold a note. I'm like, what? And I didn't realize. And then they start blowing up. I'm like, but he's like a rock star. Like, and he's like, and my dad would like, make a joke here and there. But he was like, yeah, I mean, they're having fun. They're having a good time. But, and my dad will also make fun of a lot of singers, but like Bob Dylan and stuff. But it was just weird to like grow up and I'm thinking like, isn't this like new? The grunge era is like new. And then you got like my dad who was like doing, shows before he was in the Navy for playing, like the surf band type of stuff and, the Beach Boys and that to them, that's singing,
Yeah.
And then Eddie Vedder comes around. My dad's like, oh, he can't carry a tune. And I'm like, what is that?
Also, I think you glazed over something very important, which is the fact that Eddie Vedder was just like casually at your Christmas. Like
no, he wasn't at my Christmas. I don't know.
You just walk into your family like celebration and like Eddie Vedder's there.
Who's this chump?
What?
I only saw like once probably in the past 20 something years, but like his brothers were always at Christmas. I don't know if my sister, who's a lot older than me, had definitely met him a bunch.
Yeah.
My mom has stories of just like, oh yeah, I used to take him to like work at Walgreens and stuff like that. I was like,
yeah, his mom just calls him Eddie.
Yeah,
like it's real cute.
He's
it's
Edward.
really cute. Yeah, it's like and this they're in this little band.
He's like always upstairs. He wouldn't like hang out with us. He would like go upstairs and play his guitar. And I'm like, oh, I was a baby then. So
well, I mean that paid off obviously.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that there is the part is also that. When you talked about earlier, when you start to play, like you said, 1-4-5, you sit down and write. How many songs are a 1-4-5? Almost all of them. So then you start, let me try something different.
Yeah.
Well, then you're like, a lot of the old jazz and some of the old classic rocks, they use some of those. Maybe your jazz, the 4 or 5-2-1 or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's like you can't do anything. So you got to try and be clever with your rhythms, with your vocals, with whatever it is you're doing. And I think a lot of people, it's easy.
Yeah.
Let's just palm you to play some punk, or let's just drop D in some metal or something.
I think we actually have the opposite problem as a band, which is a good problem to have. But there, like for example, one of our new songs. When I first listened to it, I was like, okay, this is just going to be an instrumental track because there's no way I can find a melody with these chord changes. They were so crazy that I was like, there's just no way. And we did kind of find a way. So that's cool. But at the same time, I think that's one of the advantages to playing music together that was... we were in jazz band together briefly, the three of us, which is hilarious because Jared was playing bass trombone.
Yeah.
You were playing bass and I was
bass.
playing guitar and no one was singing, which is like, why didn't I sing? That's stupid. But I think like also I went through this really tough phase in junior high, beginning of high school where I was just so fucking awkward. That
We
was
all
just like,
are.
no one look at me. Like I couldn't stand the idea of like singing in public, which is really funny that I ended up
Being an opera singer.
that my career.
Yeah, I didn't even really think about it. Like,
So I think, and you know what it is too, is I think there's two types of opera singers. There are the types of opera singers that were theater kids that got into singing, that were good at singing. And then there were musicians that were taught to act at some point. And so I find myself in the latter of those two categories.
Oh, that's right. You were
They're
in
both
some of the
valid.
musicals.
Yeah.
I
They're
forgot
both
about that.
valid. But like acting on stage was never the goal for me. I didn't think of myself as an actor for a long time. Also, people consistently in my young artist training years told me how terrible I was at acting.
Oh, wow.
And that became sort of a
Like a very
yes,
self-conscious.
a self-fulfilling prophecy. And at a certain point, I had to just kind of put that out of my mind completely. And
wow.
I still, I had a really good moment on stage in 2019 singing The Consul, which is a cool opera by Giancarlo Menotti, who is like an Italian-American immigrant. And it's all about this woman who just goes to the consulate every day because the secret police are like trying to kill her husband and she's just trying to get him out. And so she's fed up with the bureaucracy and it's just over and over and over again. They just tell her, well, fill out this form and like you can save your husband's life. And like it never happens. So she just keeps going back. And it's this really, she meets all these other people who are going through this horrible, ordeal of trying to get somebody out there living in this police state. It's a little foreboding, we'll say that. And I felt like that was the first time I was like, no, I know that I delivered an absolutely like strongest acting performance as well as the singing. So that was nice. But it's hard. It's hard to find those opportunities. A lot of the time you're, in a Mozart opera, you're playing a girl who their boyfriends pretend to go off to war, switch costumes into new things, and then the sisters don't notice that they're dating each other's boyfriends, and that's the plot of the opera. I'm literally just describing the opera called Così fan tutte, which is literally called, like, the literal translation of that is like, women are like that, which is sort of not great, right? It's not great material to work with as an actor, and especially as an actor in this current world. Like, it's just not very realistic. So I think when you get to be on stage and give a really strong acting performance, it's not always an opportunity that you get in opera. So that's hard too. I think there are also really good operas where you do get that opportunity, but it just depends on what they hire you to sing. And a lot of the time, if you're just not hired to do those works, then you don't get the chance. So I don't know. It's interesting, but.
So is it kind of like, I mean, assuming like, for example, down here, when you come into acting or musicians, I mean, you're a dime a dozen. You move out to some small town in Dakota and you're good, well, you're going to stand out. But here, there are just so many. Is that kind of like the same thing in the opera world where it's so many that it's hard?
Is that why you went to New York for a little bit too, to help just get around?
Well, I think also when I moved to New York because I was swiftly running out of opportunities here and my career wasn't moving forward. It was just sort of stagnant because there are only a certain number of places that you can sing in Southern California. And, after a certain amount of time, I had sung at LA Opera. I had sung, with Pacific Opera Project, these great local companies, Center Stage Opera, which now is in Santa Clarita in a different name. But, a lot of good companies that I really enjoyed working with, but they're not going to hire you over and over and over and over and over again. Nobody wants to see the same singers every time they go to a show,
look at a new
right?
Face, new fresh, new everything.
And that's how it should be. So I moved to New York kind of to expand, and quickly found that it was the same thing over there, but it was harder for me to break into because I wasn't from there. So.
So like a lot of cliques, like a lot of people know each other and you're an outsider kind of thing?
And I was never, you can spot an opera singer in New York City really easily. And I'll tell you how. First of all, they like to live around Lincoln Center and Juilliard in this little part of Manhattan it's on the west side, but it's not Upper West Side. It's in between, right? It's higher than Midtown, not quite, Upper West Side. And you'll see them. They'll have multiple scarves on, and it's only 65 degrees out.
Keeping those vocal cords good.
They have their tea, in their little Starbucks teacup or whatever, and they're usually like, and you can hear them. They'll be on the subway next to you going, just trying to warm up before their audition, because there's no place for us to warm up because it's New York City. So if you want to rent a room, that'll be $300, please. So a lot of the times, I would just wait for the train to get really loud and then just go and be like, just try to get something happening, make the chords work for heaven's sake. And I think you find a way. You find a way to do it. But anyway, if you're ever looking to spot an opera singer, that's the look. And the scarf is usually very florid. We'll put it that way. Like there's something about it, right?
It's not just a scarf from JCPenney.
No. You know, it's like, yeah, I think that was also something that was really jarring for me going from like a state school. I went to Cal State Long Beach, which is very much like middle class families, you know, like mostly kids like myself. And then I went to USC for my graduate work, and all of a sudden, you know, my like the other girls that were kind of in my age group, like they had like designer shoes and bags, and I'm like they had new iPhones. People. Yeah, they had new iPhones and stuff, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I can like hack it actually in this world. Like I'm not sure actually that I come from enough money to like make this my career. And it turns out it's true, because I'm sort of at the point where I'm pretty cash poor as opposed to, you know, certain other, like Jonathan has a house, Jared owns a house. I will probably never own a house.
You probably will at some point.
But like maybe if I'm lucky, right? But that's okay. Like I made my peace with that pretty early on. I think it's just it's a tough field to stay competitive in vocally if you're not able to pay for those lessons, those coachings, the things you need to sound good. So like that can even boil down to like food choices, because if you have acid reflux as an opera singer, it's a real disaster, which I do.
Or like too much milk. I've heard that's not good.
That's not good either. If you eat like garbage, you're not going to sing your best. So that's more of a food bill than you would have. So I think like those costs add up. Also healthcare, things like that, you don't really have. I was very lucky actually that my young artist program provided healthcare. It was the best healthcare I've ever had. RIP, great healthcare. I now have an HMO, and that's okay, you know, because we live in California, so like I can get that, which is not something you'd get in every state. So I don't know. That's
awesome.
You gotta like count your blessings.
The wife and I, we're gonna go We're gonna go out to New York and Washington D.C. in 2 weeks or a week.
Oh so my gosh!
I know while I'm in downtown.
I gotta give you a list of places.
Scarves.
Yeah. Well,
fruitcake.
Yeah, totally. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
We're gonna go see Wicked. Sheila, I could care absolutely in any way, shape, or form less if the entire play, those things died out. I don't care. But she wants to go, so we're gonna go see Wicked.
It's a good show.
I just don't. Yeah.
I'm glad that you guys are like putting your money into going to see a show, because like the industry definitely like with it's same thing with, you know, bands, obviously like venues took a huge hit. So I love that you guys are spending your money doing that.
She
was exactly. And I think it's great too, because it's you're going to hear some good singing. You know, that's I think that's one advantage that Broadway has really they have not forgotten that the singing is actually the most important thing. And they've managed to find a way to be a little bit more inclusive in their casting too. So I feel like that's a good step forward. And like, we want a big tent, right? Like we want just as many people as possible to come and hear this good singing.
No, but my band is like of this subgenre with this.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a lot of that in rock music specifically. Like, you know, the term new metal, like that to me, I was just kind of like, what does that even mean? And then once it was explained to me, I was like, oh, okay, that makes perfect sense. But I think we get too obsessed in the rock genre about like, well, we're a doom metal band, or we're this, or we're stoner rock, like we're this, we're that. That's great, I think, for like hashtags, but not for making good music. I think like you just have to fuck genre. Sorry. Can I say that?
I mean, I get into it. Like you got your punk, your skate punk, your pop punk, your all this, and you got your, like you said, your death metal, your doom metal, your I don't even, and it's like a lot of it's like I think a lot of people are they're trying to somehow make themselves different than somebody else, but at the same time they kind of sound a little bit the same, but not really. But then what do you do? I just think, look, just, you know, hey, to me you got punk, you've got rock, you've got metal, blues and jazz and country. Yeah. Something fits somewhere in that rationale somewhere.
Yeah.
And rap. I guess rap.
Yeah, I completely agree too. I feel like
I mean, we're kind of off on that too, because like when we were playing around the time Marina said she'd like to sing with us, so we were like, what are you gonna sing? Like,
yeah, I was a little afraid. I was a little afraid because Damn Regina, which is their band,
the band that Jared and I were
Damn
before
Regina?
as a hardcore band.
I do remember that name.
Huh?
I remember that name.
Yeah, probably because that's when I started meeting you at shows randomly.
Okay.
With my wife, because she liked to go see you guys.
Okay.
And so, and we were playing stuff like that, and we went through a lot of singers, or vocalists, if you want to call them. And then
so-called vocalists.
We love them. We love them.
Yeah, and Marina said, "Hey, I want to." She was like, "I don't know where you were living. I don't know if you were like living in Long Beach or whatever."
I think I was in New York. I had this really disastrous.
No, I'm saying like when we did How Things Got Distorted.
Oh, How It Got Distorted.
I think you were in Long Beach.
I think I was in college. Yeah, just undergrad.
And I was so confused. Like, wait, how are you gonna? She's like, I want to sing for someone. So we had a couple things recorded and we played some for her. And she's like, oh, I'll sing to this one.
Where you're like, okay, here's a song for you.
Yeah, that's.
Well, I mean, we just had extra songs, and we had no idea.
That's exactly what they did, and then they sent it to me, and I think I just sat down and wrote a bunch of lyrics. On the spot.
Because I think you showed up at Jared's house.
Yeah, and I think we did it all in one day. Like it was just, it was just a one-off. And we listened to it recently. I was like, this is still a banging song. Like
it was like a decade ago.
I really wish so the irony with me is that I always wanted to like sing in a band and be a singer and play guitar and just be a songwriter. But
like a good old Taylor Swift,
right? But when I was in high school, I mean, like, yeah, like I'm a bigger woman. Like I'm not a twig. I'm not stick thin, and so I thought, what are the chances that I'm actually going to have a career like as a singer songwriter? Because I'm not.
Style.
Yeah, there's a look, and keep in mind this is the age of Christina Aguilera and Britney Spears too, which was a really dark time. Yeah, dark time for
not for dancing though, guys.
But it was also the age of the Fiona Apples and the Alanis Morissettes, and all of those were very inspiring to me. Tori Amos. Oh my God, I could just go on and on. But I thought I don't look that way at all, so there's no chance. So I got into opera. And the irony now is that all I see getting cast is like thinner opera singers.
So that image is moving everywhere.
Yeah, and Lizzo and Adele are out there, kicking butt. So I'm just thinking to myself, like, what was I thinking? But also it's a good lesson. If there are any young women who play music listening, don't worry about that stuff. And also I wish I hadn't listened. Like I wish I had told people to fuck off a little bit more when it came to things like that. But I also think too, that's what I love about metal is that I think metal's a more, you get bands like Windhand, Baroness, things are where the aesthetic, where what the people look like are much less important than the music. And that's one of the things I think that
it's not like so really it's like off the cookie cutter vibe, so you get this weird like I didn't expect that out of it.
And like you do go to some shows where it's like okay, like everyone here is a scene girl and they look amazing, and I just feel kind of out of place sometimes. But I also think too that it's interesting that I can feel more at home in a setting like that oftentimes than I do in an opera house. It's strange. And I think I'm one of those people that can be comfortable in a lot of different settings, but is never truly at home. And I feel much more at home, like playing this music with these guys. Like to me, it feels much more aligned with like who I am as a human being, which is a little.
But I think that's. I think in anywhere you have, and I don't want to say like, you have your gatekeepers, but it's kind of
totally.
I mean, unfortunately, there's people that control the music industry, the film, like all this kind of stuff. Yeah. And so it's you can always have that, down with the man, F you attitude. Yeah. And there's a chance, guess what? You're just going to be playing bars for a lot of years. And never making, and I think, and that's like when we played with Dave, like the Retcons and Undercover Monsters, that's what I liked about it because we never had this delusion of, we're the greatest band in the world, dude. F your couch.
Yeah.
It was just like, you know what? Hey, this is what we're doing. Let's just go out. We'll have a good time and just whatever happens.
I think there's something that really clicked for me making music for like pleasure and joy as opposed to money. That was a big dynamic shift in my brain, I think, that I'm still not quite, because I still very much have this narrative in my mind of like, you're not a songwriter, you're just a singing monkey, you know, like
just a yahoo.
I think like sometimes you get pigeonholed into this idea of what you're supposed to be as a musician. And I just feel like as I get older, I care less about that, which I feel like that's a trend, right? Like a lot of musicians, I feel like someone I really look up to is somebody like Shirley Manson and Garbage, because they, you know, she started with that band in her early 30s, you know? Yeah. It wasn't, or late 20s rather, but you know, she had been around. And I think that made a big difference in the music. So, you know, not like Garbage isn't everybody's thing, but I got to see her, I think in 2016.
Stop calling her Garbage. Jeez.
They were pretty good.
But they put on such a good show, and some guy threw beer on her and she refused to keep singing until security threw him out, and that was it. I was like, I'm obsessed with you for the rest of your life.
I'm infatuated now.
I love me a good like Scottish woman. Like they're just they are out of fucks to give. They just I love them so much. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I agree. I 100, like you said, that sometimes people can get obsessed, even if they're not making money. But we're going to do this and we're going to make all this, and hey, and to me, best of luck to you. If that's what you want to do, I have no issue with that. Go ahead. Yeah. Do you want to, like the ones that get me are the pay for play ones, or sell your tickets, and I'm like, geez, I don't even care about this band that much.
We've had so many offers for like, hey, do you guys like all you have to do is sell 25 tickets? I'm like, that's a lot of people. I'm like, do you guys know this is LA? Because like people don't come out. Like, I think it's really interesting too that people think that system is going to continue to work.
I know.
Like, isn't it ludicrous?
But
because like
somehow
we're going into,
does, but also it's stupid. It doesn't make any sense.
I guess you're right in that there are always people that are desperate enough to kind of do that, but. Do you guys think that's changing? I'm not actually sure.
I hope so, but I don't know.
I hope so too.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's been around as long as I've been playing. At like right after high school.
Well, I think that's like kind of like the whole basis of Ticketmaster on a grand scale.
Yes.
Well, you want to play here, you got to guarantee me X amount.
Yeah.
Or it's like when we get some of these other bands, I'll play here, but you have to guarantee me X amount. So I think that it to an extent, I don't think it's going to go anywhere.
I don't think so either. Yeah.
I think that there's just people, like you said, that take advantage of people who, hey, yeah, we got a band, we want to do this. Well, you can play here, but you have to do this first. So it's kind of playing on people's emotions that they're going to be big and just basically taking advantage of them.
Yeah. I think also too, there's this independent pop singer. Her name's Queen Herbie. I don't know if you ever heard of her, but she she was in a group called Carmen, and they had a big hit like about 10 years ago, and then she kind of disappeared off the face of earth, and then came back with a complete rebrand, and she just sold out the Ford like 2 nights in a row because she built it all, and she sells her own makeup, she sells clothes, she sells all this different stuff to try and make it. And I'm not saying that's what everybody has to do, but she has all these different sort of passive income streams that end up giving her the ability to rent out these bigger venues and sell them out. And I think that's the trick. If you can learn how to do that, if you have a fan base that loves you enough, you can make that happen for yourself. So I think there's something to be said for social media as a tool for growth, but you have to, like, as you said, it has to be authentic. It has to be something that's,
obviously I'm going to have to start selling like my Jonathan hamburgers at all of our shows. That's
yes, get yourself a Jonathan burger. Yeah.
We got to come up with a better name. That's a terrible name for it.
I actually did know someone who's in a band who had like a side hustle selling kolaches, the Polish. Anyway, it's whatever. And one of the guys.
I'm not talking side hustle. It'd be the mainstream.
One of the guys in the band was named Cole, so they called it Cole Achis. I was like, perfect. Like branding, great marketing. 10 out of 10. No notes.
You come to our shows. We have sliders and fries and
that's
shakes.
Actually Jonathan makes killer sliders, so maybe, I think we gotta
that needs to be your thing.
Yeah. No, I know, and if I thought that I were capable of like creating a makeup line, I would do that, but I know my limits. Like I know my strengths, and that is not one of them.
Well, I remember with my dad when I was in high school, I think it was. Yeah, he was an engineer for the government. He designed missiles. You got to have your job and all that. And I just remember when I would start, playing drums or, junior high and then start getting in high school. And he's like, music is okay, but you might want to find a real job. and to an extent, I was like, well, to hell with you, Dad. But at the same time, it's like, he kind of is right. The chances of finding a job to pay bills and being in a band paying bills is that ain't happening.
Well, I think that's so interesting you say that, because I have a really similar story. When I was in undergrad, we had this great teacher, Dr. Carney, and he would at the beginning of the semester invited us all up, to speak in front of the class, and he'd just ask us questions, and he would just be like, okay, so what are you going to do for a living when you're done with school? And I was like, I'm going to be a musician. I'm going to perform. I'm going to sing. And he was like, what else are you going to do? And I was like, that's it. I'm just going to do that. And he was like, well, okay, but what else? And he was so right. And it pissed me off at the time. It made me so angry. I just I just hate it. Like, I would dread going to that class because it was but he was right. And the thing about it too is he also passed away, which is really terrible. But that was one of those moments where, I knew, I think in the back of my mind that person was right, but I just didn't want to accept fact. I didn't want to accept the fact that it wasn't about, I always thought, especially early on, you're the best musician in the room, you're the best singer in the room, you're going to get the job. Mm-hmm. And the real world is just not like that. Yeah, there's a lot of reasons. Yeah, there's a lot of reasons like for who gets hired and who doesn't. And I think now I can look back with 20/20 hindsight and say, oh gosh, I was such an arrogant little shit. And he was so nice for putting up with me. But at the same time, now when I'm asked to kind of speak to younger people, or, I go in and work with my best friend is a high school choir teacher. And so I talk to her kids and other people's, young musicians. And I say, you got to learn to do something else as well. Ideally, like learn to code, do like Substack, like development, like, you gotta figure out what your side hustle is, and ideally something that you can do remotely as well is so important now. So I feel like it's part of my that will be the gift I give to the next generation, is to just say, like, listen, it's a jungle out there and you need something to fall back on just in case.
I mean, I also look at it as like, just learn more than one thing. I think that's just good in life, because it's like there's so many things that come up. Like how I don't know. I used to do DirecTV installations, and I also fell into hooking up people's home theater systems, which also led me learning how to hook up all kinds of sound system, professional audio, because they're similar in line. It's just, that's something good to know, because I don't know how many times like we've all gone to like Guitar Center or whatever, and you like ask for certain things, and those. Maybe that person doesn't know what you're asking for.
Yeah.
Or they give you bad advice, or you didn't ask the right questions. Like, I've saved myself a lot of money, our band a lot of money, by getting, knowing how to fix things. Like, I just fixed Jared's guitar amp, his cabinet recently, because it was like, had a bunch of noise and we couldn't figure out why. We bought it used, and I opened it up and I was like, oh, somebody like soldered all the wires to the guitar speakers. And they just did it like haphazardly. I'm like, oh, and so I had to desolder everything and reclip it all. And Jared was like, I don't think that's going to be fix the problem. Like, just trust me. And then I did it all, and it was like, oh, all the noise went away. Who would have known that some crappy solder job in some like 40-year-old cabinet?
Dang.
Just, it's just like, so I learned how to do basic electronics over the years, and it's just little things that help. Like how much would it cost for like a musician, like as if you're listening now, like you have a cabinet, a speaker cabinet, how much does it cost to fix? Does anybody even know like an amp tech place near them? Yeah. Like, do you? Like I don't know that many people like that. Some of our gear costs thousands and thousands of dollars. If you don't know how to like just fix some of the basic stuff or even know how it works.
Yeah.
Like it's good to know that stuff. It's good to know, things that are similar. Like I have some friends in Hollywood and stuff like that. And they know, they also got into it from, they were artists trying to get artwork, and trying to be illustrators or something. Then they end up being like working on movies. So if like as a musician, I would even recommend people like learn things that you like that also be adjacent. Like if you happen to, if you like electronics, that's easy. Like we have a lot of electronics. If I don't know, woodworking, because there's woodworking and a lot of instruments and stuff like that, metalworking, anything like that. It's just helpful, and you can get side jobs while you're coming up over the years and stuff like that. Maybe you learn how to. We always hear of stories of people making instruments because they get some experience and they're like, oh, you know what? Maybe if I made this for, my guitar or something like that. And next thing you know, some of that stuff kicks off. Or if you're like a machinist, you learn how to make guitar bridges or something, Just, you never know. It's a good idea not just to be pigeonhole yourself for anything, I think.
Well, that's where those came from.
Yeah, I remember when you got those. I was
bought those offline and built them.
Yeah, that's so cool. I mean, but I feel like learning a trade and a skill, something that like people are always going to need plumbers and electricians, So like it's just I think, especially as we look towards this like uncertain future. I don't want to be too like doom and gloom about like where the world is going because because like who knows. But at the same time, again, if it's something people always need, like there's merit to that. So especially the real practical stuff. Like I love that idea.
Well, and I think that people view it. It's like okay, if you go and you get an engineering degree or a doctorate, so now you're going to go be an engineer and it's blah blah, and you got to do engineering. I think that people in the music, I'm going to be music, and so I got to do music, and it's like you said, no. You're going to pigeonhole yourself like a drummer.
Yeah.
Okay, you could go and you can get your degree from any of these drum schools. You can just be an amazing drummer. But if you don't get the right views, now you're just some drummer that's amazing and you have nothing.
Yeah.
But like you said, okay, you could be a drummer. You got maybe a bass player, guitar player. You know how to work on stuff. You know how to you know how to do something else, because it's real hard to get into making millions.
Yeah. I had this guy contact me recently for voice lessons, and he was like a head of a music school or something, and he berated me for a solid half an hour about my resume because I have always been of the mind that I like to pay my rent and eat food. And
turns out that works pretty good.
Turns out, that's all you actually are like capable of doing sometimes. And he was just like, well, I don't need to know about the dog walking or the office job or this or that on your resume. I just need to know about the music stuff. And I'm like, cool. Okay. The music stuff is also on there if you'll notice. Like, and he's like, well, I just don't understand why you wouldn't, work in the music field. And I'm like, well, that's great. I would have loved to have just worked in music.
We all want that.
And then he was like, and he was like, well, in the real world, you need lots of, experience. And I was like, oh, I thank you. I've been living in the real world for some time. Thank you so much.
You have traveled the world and played operas all around the world.
Well, and I think that's something that you run into as a human being, especially. I don't know too. I think people tend to think that if you've had lots of different jobs and lots of different fields, that you're some sort of transient and you're not going to stay in a job for too long.
Reliable.
Yeah, which is, I wouldn't say that I am the best employee in like non-musical jobs. I've definitely quit jobs badly, and I'm very sorry to all those people. But when I do a desk job, I'm usually pretty good and I know what I'm doing. But the problem, I think, is that if your heart's not in it, you're never going to be able to give an administrative position the same amount of love and attention as you will music. Yeah. And that's hard. So you have to figure out what that balance is. And I think also there have been times where it's like, yeah, all of my income for this 1 year came from gigs, and that was great. And then the next year it was just nothing. 2019 for me, which was really rough because it was right before 2020. I just ended up I had a bunch of gigs at the end of 2018. It was going real well. 2019, all of a sudden things weren't really happening. So it was just sort of and then boom, pandemic. I had a bunch of things lined up and they were all canceled. So that sucked, but it's not any different than any other musicians have had to deal with. And honestly, I feel pretty lucky that, I was able to at least, survive during the pandemic. Like being in New York for the bulk of it was really rough, and there were a lot of people that weren't that lucky. So I think we have that to think about too as musicians is, COVID is still around. Like, how do you deal with that? How do you kind of, we've definitely had scenarios where I've been hanging out with them and I'm like, oh, I just got a text message from the rehearsal coordinator that I was at last night and somebody tested positive for COVID. So I'm just going to go in the car and like take a quick COVID test and I'll be right back. Just in case, because like I give a shit whether or not I give somebody COVID, and I get how it's easy to not care. But I'm just the type of person that I know I'm going to feel horrible if I give someone else COVID. So, and also I understand that some people just don't have the time. Like if you're working, I think that's why the pandemic killed so many people, is like some people just had to go to work. Like some people, like during the pandemic did not have the option of staying home. Like,
and to note also, a lot of the transmission is air, there's a lot of airborne bass and you're a singer. Like also I think also mess with your head. Like
singers being super spreaders is like also a really real thing.
I'm saying it's like you're also more susceptible. Like that's also part of your income. I think I can play without a voice on multiple instruments.
Right. Right.
And don't even have to open my mouth.
Yeah,
once.
Seriously. And you shouldn't have to if you're a drummer. Anyway, but like that is kind of scary when you also think about for singers, like there's a lot more that they can't like, they have to typically like singers of a band, they're kind of like the front person as like the public may know. So they have to like manage their voice for shows. They tend to do more interview talking. They tend to do like people tend to talk to them more. So, and also like you can't live without, everything's focused on that, and your voice can be easily taxed.
Yeah, I've been sick and had to kind of network at an event and lost my voice so badly that the next day I could barely get through the gig. So that's hard. Like, I feel like that's something that singers deal with on the road too. It's like everybody in the band can go party and like get drunk until 2 a.m. Singers out at like 11:30 is like peace.
That's rock and roll.
Yeah. Well, and then like there's a certain amount of self-preservation that you have to just kind of be aware of. And I've always been really good at that, but what I'm not good at is being like the person that networks, the person that reaches out and is like, I need help with this, like, or like, that's something I still struggle with. So networking is just so important. Like,
well, I think that's one, like when we talked about like with Vince Neil, I think that he just partied. He didn't care. Like, at that young age, he could hit those notes.
Absolutely,
he could get that screaming out. And Axl, and let's just go out and party.
Yeah.
But once you start getting older, and it's like
it
another one
catches up with you. Yeah.
When I hear Metallica, and you hear some of those younger stuff back in the '80s and then the '90s with the Black Album, and you hear him sing it now, you can tell he's struggling. Yeah. He just can't get some of them higher ones up, but he still does it. I got to give it to him.
Also the band can detune to their things, and it doesn't even break a sweat for us.
Yeah. Well, and that's what's nice, I think, as opposed to opera, where like if you show up and you're like, listen, I just want to take this aria down a half step. Like I don't have a B flat today. Let's just do an A. Like that's not an option. So with bands, like that's great. Like I'm just kind of like, oh. Also, my voice seems to hold up a lot better. Just in general when I'm not. I think for sopranos specifically, your high notes are such a big deal, and I never like they used to be a lot better for me than they are now, but it's because if you're not doing it regularly, if you're not in a routine, it is very much if you don't use it, you lose it. But then the opposite is also true. Like when you just Jonathan actually recently. Played me a video of
which video?
James Hetfield's vocal warm-ups.
Oh yeah.
Because he says in the YouTube video, I blew out my voice doing the Black album, so now I got to do these warm-ups. Me.
Off of a tape cassette player that he got.
That he got, which is exactly what I used to do back in the day. Like I had my little tape recorder, go to my voice lesson, record it, and then like practice with it in the car. So I thought, wow, that there's really something to that, but also that's something I would love to, like, if there's any rock singers out there who are like struggling vocally, like, holler at me. Let's talk because there's ways to like get around it. And I think actually James Hetfield is a really great example of that because when you hear him live, there's a certain amount of like snarl in the sound that cuts over this big band, even through, these massive venues. I saw them at Outside Lands, which is a really bad example because it's an outdoor, like the sound just goes everywhere. But he still sounded great. And there was no auto-tune for that performance, which I've noticed he's a big fan of the auto-tune now.
Maybe that's why, because he's struggling.
But also that would make
Marina also does a really good James Hetfield impression.
Everyone. I think like it's like all you have to do is at the end of every consonant. Actually, I love it. Like it's one of the things I love most about his singing is you can recognize it's him immediately because of the way he sings. So I actually love that. Yes. But anyway, the whole point being, it's difficult, especially as you get older. If you're a man and you get past age 42, you also start dealing with like physiological changes that happen in your body that do affect your voice as well. So I don't know. Good basic vocal training can really help you get through stuff like that. Even when it's not, even somebody that's in a hardcore band, like there are ways to scream that are less vocally taxing on your chords. So like,
that's not cool though.
I think,
but I hear you.
Okay. Yeah. So have you guys seen the thing of the Olivia Rodrigo clean scream?
No.
She does like a punk scream or her impression of it, and it's just so bad. Like it just sounds like, like it's just not good. But the point being, there is a way like to make it sound really badass and not be so tough on your chords. But also there's something really rock and roll about just like thrashing your voice to the point that you are even create, like I would say that we're back to Lemmy again, but like that you create your own sound by sort of beating up your voice, and that's fucking rock and roll, man. Like that's so cool too. Like
that Ace of Spades
I can't even. Yeah, I can't. No, I know, right? I can't even fault it. So and also there are singers who have nodes on their chords that sing with nodes for their entire career, and have some problems at different points, but I mean, I'm thinking of Broadway singers, somebody like Bernadette Peters, who clearly has like struggles vocally with a lot of things, like, and manages to sound amazing and still deliver amazing performances. So you just got to find a way that works for you, I think.
Well, I think this is just pure speculation. I don't know, but one that gets me is I was going to call it not Dimebag Daryl. But he played a singer in Pantera, Phil Anselmo.
Yeah.
You lit man, he would just, he let them growls go, and it was so awesome. And now when you hear him in interview, It is what I see.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, is that just his voice? But he wasn't like that. I'm like, man, did all that screaming really mess up your voice?
Well, and I think that's so interesting, and I would love because I'm a nerd. I love the scientific kind of element to that because obviously, at a certain point, biologically, things start to change, right? With your chords, like your chords elongate or they shorten depending on how you use them. And it's like any other muscle, in the body. If you do nothing but, like bicep exercises over and over, your biceps are going to be huge, right? Or like whatever. I don't know. I don't go. I don't know. I don't go to the gym.
She does. She does leg day only.
Leg day only. Exactly. Or just no gym at all. Anyway, whatever you do, whatever works for you. But yeah, it's like if you use a muscle in a certain way repeatedly, it's going to be affected. So I think that's the interesting thing about the human voice.
Well, fantastic.
Yeah.
I think it was
pretty much
great conversation. So before we close, so what is Bones and Teeth coming up to?
I think we're planning on releasing our new single, Death Tax,
pretty soon
at the end of this month, hopefully. And if not, I think what's really cool now is it seems like people are just releasing music whenever it's ready and not. I love a surprise drop, that's really fun. So I think we're looking at kind of focusing on one track at a time at the moment, which I'm interested to try because I think for us, we love to kind of nitpick things to death.
So do you mean like you're going to release the whole album, but just kind of focus promoting one song at a time or just release one song at a time?
I think we're going to do singles. Yeah. I think we're going to do like singles or double side, like
the old B-sides and whatnot.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the bands that we've been following have been sort of following that in that vein. And then when we have an album ready, we'll drop it again. I do think we're getting closer to that. The more, Jared really wanted to be here today, but he has some kidney stones that are trying to kill him. So he's miserable. So he's writing all these really gloomy tracks for us, which is great. I'm like, I love this. This sounds like so good. So I think we'll get to the point sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Totally. Are you guys going to do videos?
I hope so. Yeah.
We're shooting for doing
we do
some
have
live
one.
streams.
Yeah, we do have one on YouTube now for the old world is dying, which is our favorite song off the album that we released in June. So
is that
check
Dux
it out.
or
Brooks?
Brooks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which Bruxism is kind of the TMJ thing where your teeth grind together, and so we're bones and teeth.
I didn't know that.
So we went that route. We
Clever.
kind of like tried to tie it together. We want to be fancy, but we're not. We're getting there. We'll get there at some point.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Thanks for coming out and joining me today.
No
Thank
problem.
you for having us. This was so much
Enjoy
fun.
talking about all the shenanigans, even if it's pipe organs. I enjoy some pipe organs.
Everything from Fish to
Oh, stupid. My worst. So
Fish to James Hetfield.
I worked at a A&W, and one of the guys, it was owned by a dad, and the two brothers worked there. And one of them, big old huge weed head.
Yes.
He was odd.
We
and
love
his older brother was trying to be the good kid, but yet still trying to, I'm cool. I'm not the good kid. Anyway, this fool, when he found out that I was a drummer, have you ever seen Fish?
Oh,
I'm like, I know, I've heard Real Big Fish. Well, why haven't you been listening to Fish? I'm like, I just don't like Fish. I just can't get into it.
Yeah.
Ever since then. So I was listening to Fish. Are you listening to Fish yet? I'm like, dude, I don't care about Fish.
20 years later.
I don't care. I do not. Yeah, he just would not shut up about how amazing Fish was. And I'm just like, man, to hell with Fish, man.
I would so much rather go to a Real Big Fish concert than
Yeah,
a Fish concert.
That would be so much fun. You leave with a smile on your face.
Be
And not be
skanking all
like
night.
just tired.
Yeah, it'd be great. It'd be great. I would so prefer that. So prefer it over Fish. No offense to Fish. We love you.
Yeah, we love
Fish.
everybody.
If you're listening, I'm so sorry.
Kind of, but not really. Wink, wink.
Really.
All right. Well, yeah, thanks for coming. You guys have a good afternoon. Safe drive back, hopefully.
Yeah, we'll be good.
Thank you.
Thank you.